Okay, so life during the Great Depression wasn't fun. um, this isn't a fun way to start the unit in or the semesters talking about the Great Depression. But the next thing that we do is World War II, which I do think a lot of kids are interested in. So in my slideshows, I'll always have this week at a glance. So yesterday was just to start this Chapter 9 review. We're already a day behind. So what I will do for tomorrow is we will do Hoover's response to the Great Depression. So I'll move all these things up a day. So we won't start Chapter 1, Lesson 2 until next week. But there's also a link to the Edpuzzle in here. And then there's a link to the organizer, though it's not done, but it's in here. And then we probably won't do the Schoology quiz because we won't have gotten that far. So no worries about that. I will change this up before tomorrow. But this is, I just want you to see that, in this slideshow that you guys can access, I'm going to have all those links in there all the time. Okay, so Trevor, you missed when we talked about the start of the Depression. Trevor, do you know why the Great Depression started?
Wasn't it because of like a war or something?
Indirectly. So World War I, I guess a lot of money was spent. And then, but after war, there was a time of prosperity in the Roaring 20s. So there were a lot of people spending a lot of money. What people started to do was spend money on credit, meaning like if you spend money on a credit card, you're not actually paying for it. You might only be paying $10 a month on $100. So that's what people were doing. In the 1920s. And then in the 1930s, all of a sudden, sorry, just got a little distracted. No, sorry, Mr. Jackson. So in the 1920s, people were spending all this money, but they didn't really have it to spend. And then there was a stock market crash, and tons of people lost tons of money. The banks crashed, and we went into this period of depression. And part of it is because people weren't paying back their war debts. Germany owed the United States a lot of money, actually, and they weren't able to pay us back because they were also under depression. Some of the banks went bankrupt. So a lot of bad things happened. So then during the 1930s, you can see there in the screen, about 30,000 companies had gone out of business. 25% of the workforce was unemployed. Unemployment was at an all-time high. People lost their home, and they built these little towns called Hoovervilles, and I have some pictures that are coming up. They called them Hoovervilles because the president was Hoover, Herbert Hoover. And then these are just, some of the summaries. So life was bad enough for most people, and then immigrants, it was even worse. So the government just started deporting immigrants who had violated the law. So if you broke the law and you were an immigrant, you got sent back to wherever you're from. Repatriation drove poor immigrants back to their homes. They couldn't afford to stay here, so they left. And in the South, the U.S. was actually just rounding up Mexicans. It didn't matter if they were legal or not. And they sent about 500,000 Mexican immigrants back to Mexico, even though about half of them were actually U.S. citizens. Then we have the Dust Bowl. And like I said, you're going to see a nice clip about the Dust Bowl when you watch that video. The Dust Bowl, you can see, was this brown area here. And one of the things, if you do your reading, is that the farmers in these areas had farmed the land so much that they took off all the good topsoil, and all that was left was the dusty soil. And that's part of why when there was a drought and there were windstorms, it picked up that dust and actually sent it not thousands, but hundreds of miles. In fact, I remember my grandma talking about it. Here we are. If you can see my arrow, I'm from this part of northern Wisconsin. And my grandma once said, yeah, we could even feel like the dust in the air up in Wisconsin. So it was not just in these areas, even though these were probably the worst right here. It was all over the United States. The winds carried that dust. And that made, people in these areas had to leave because there was no there was no food, there was no water, so a lot of people just left. Here's a picture. So this storm cloud coming is filled with dust, and this is telling you major areas it covered, but the dust was so thick that a lot of times the livestock was blinded and suffocated and died. In 1934, a severe dust storm accumulated 12 million tons of dust, and it got all the way to Chicago and New York and DC. So, you know, we're not that far from Chicago, so you can see how my grandma would have noticed it way up in northern Wisconsin. By 1940, 2.5 million Americans left the plains and moved to California, to the north, to the west. They weren't staying there. And this is just saying that overcultivation led to that. So, like I said, the video is going to show you some really cool stuff during that time. On a positive, arts and entertainment actually increased during this time period. Why do you guys think? I mean, it says there, Americans turned to entertainment. So, hey, I'm almost done. Just keep it down a minute. Yeah. Entertainment during this time period went on an upswing a little bit. People were sad. People were depressed. I mean, think about the pandemic and how bored you guys are. It was kind of the same during that time period. So they started, the film industry took off. You see The Wizard of Oz there. The Wizard of Oz, I don't know if you guys know this, was the first movie that was ever in color. So have you guys seen it? Have you guys seen The Wizard of Oz?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, okay. So it starts out in black and white, and then when Dorothy opens the door to Munchkin Land, or to the land of Oz, it's in color. Imagine being in a movie theater and you've never seen color on the theater before, and then all of a sudden there it is. So it was a huge breakthrough in the entertainment industry. And then where we listen to podcasts and things like that, they listened to the radio, and they had full-length comedies, they had soap operas, music, baseball games. So the radio was really popular. There was no TV yet. And then writers and photographers also wrote about the time. And the next picture I have, so these pictures here of the people living in like boxes, those were like, could be parts of those shanty towns where people literally were living in cardboard boxes, or they would take like corrugated metal they found and made like little homes. And there were literally, in big towns, you can't see it in this one. This one kind of looks like it's in the country. But there were thousands of these next to each other, homeless people who just kind of gathered in one place, and that's where they ended up living because that's all they could afford. And photography really took an upswing during the Great Depression too. And you can see here, this picture on the right is a very, very famous picture of the Depression. It just shows, you know, a mom's worry with her 2 small children and how is she going to feed them. And this mom is probably in her 20s, maybe early 30s, and she looks like she's about 60. So if you guys even just Google Depression photography, there's some really amazing pictures out there that really paint a picture of what was happening. That's it. Do you guys have any questions?